Lisette, thanks so much for joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been this was like a last minute pivot right here. And so I want the listeners to understand, hey, sometimes this happens where we didn't know 24 hours ago we were going to have this conversation. And then, I get a message from some of my team, hey, there's this amazing woman with an incredible story. We've got to have this conversation. And so what I know about this is that God's going to show up in really powerful ways, and he's going to minister to so many people through your story, Lisette. And so I'm excited for that. And your story is marked by a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of wrestling. But before we dive into that right there, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself right now? Who are you? Where do you live? What does your family look like right now? And then we'll dive back into your story.
Yeah, of course. So I am currently in Florida. Love it. I was born and raised in Maryland, so the cold weather, don't miss it here. I moved from North Carolina it was back in December,
Mm,
we moved to Florida. So we're still kind of getting used to it, but we love it.
mm,
Right now, I'm single mom of four, my daughter,
mm.
Callie, three boys, Aiden, Micah, and Liam. They range from 7 to 12, but my daughter being 12,
Wow.
might as well be 16.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? That my daughter is 8 and I feel like she might as well be 16. I'm like, wait, it starts this early? Hold on a
I,
second.
I know. Well, to be fair to her, we'll get into that. But over the last 2 years, she's been through a lot, which I think kind of forced her to
Yeah.
grow up.
Yeah.
But but she was just always a little mama, and so
Mm,
having three brothers, I think, kind of encouraged that even more.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then having the three boys,
Mm,
it's crazy, hectic, but it's so fun.
yeah. Yeah. Phew, man. Well, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your story. And I know right before we jumped on and started recording, you were telling me that, from the outset, a lot of people would think your story started in 2020, but it didn't. It started before that. So why don't you go ahead and reach back to where you would say, hey, this story started here, and just walk us through that.
Okay, yeah. So like you said, we lost Mo in 2020, and while that was a huge part of this story started back in 2017, and it was just a
Mm,
very direct encounter with God. I was sitting in a Bible study, and the speaker, we were doing one of those video studies, and the speaker had asked the question to us, "What is your worst case scenario?"
mm,
And as a military spouse, a spouse in general, there was
yeah.
just, I remember shaking, and I didn't want to write it down. And I said, I'm not. And and she asked again. She said, write it down. And so I wrote it down. I wrote down, losing Mo.
Mm,
And as the video went on, she said, so what if your worst case scenario happens? Is God still good?
mm,
And mind you, I grew up in the church. I was a youth leader, all the things, right? I was a lifelong Christian. Um, I considered myself a strong Christian. And in
mm.
that moment, my answer was, I don't know.
Wow.
I I didn't like that answer.
Yeah.
I I sat there with that for a while, and I remember going home and telling Mo, we got asked this question, and he was like, "That's just a natural reaction. How would you know? You haven't been through it." I said, "No,
Yeah.
it's more than that. It's more than that because we grow up in this environment of God is so good, and it's so easy to say the right words and look the part on Sunday morning and all of that. And even though I'm sitting here in a Bible study, I
Yeah.
still did not know if God was still going to be good and enough for me if my
Mm,
worst case scenario happened. So it prompted this searching and this wrestling with God of God, why not? What is missing for me? Where am I missing the mark with you
mm,
that I don't feel confident in saying yes? And fast forward to July of 2017, we lost seven friends in a training
wow.
accident.
Oh, goodness.
And it was one of the guys was on Mo's team, and at that time, it was those that cliche that hit too close to home.
Yeah.
And it hit too close to home because Mo was supposed to be on that plane. And last minute he got
Wow.
changed, didn't go to that training, and he ended up staying home because he had to go last minute, right? Like they
Right.
changed him. You can't go here. We need you to go to this other one. And the accident happened on my birthday. And so that day he was home and instead of on that plane. And that feeling of, okay. And so then I said, okay, God, this, no. Because in that moment, I knew I would not be okay.
Yeah.
So, but it was such a pivotal moment because that was 2.5 years before Mo passed. And that is that accident and that initial encounter in January is what prompted both Mo and I to really dig deeper and really search God and have God search our hearts for where were we missing this? Where, we were serving in church together,
Yeah.
but there was still something that we weren't sure that we would be able to stand there with a straight face and say
Mm.
that God is good if we lost each other. And so it it did so much to help it heal things in our marriage. It did
Yeah.
so much to help heal relationships that he hadn't kind of fixed. And
Wow.
so when he passed, there's people, very important people in his life that said, I'm so grateful for the conversations that we had right before this deployment. I'm so grateful for the relationship restoration that we had. And that 100% was only God preparing our hearts and preparing us for what was to come.
Wow.
And so when, fast forward to March of 2020, when Mo went away on this deployment and unfortunately never came back, I remember getting that knock on the door. And there's just a part of me that knew. And when I was given that news, I remember like the desperate cry, right? I mean, that's what you have is that desperate cry out to
Yeah.
God. But the chaplain was there, and I just remember just sobbing and asking the chaplain, please just pray for me.
Mm.
Just pray for me. And it brought back in that prayer, it just brought back all those feelings of like, Lucy, I told you I am enough, but am I really enough for you in this moment?
Mm.
And I can't explain it because it sounds backwards, but in that moment, even 10 minutes after finding out that Mo had passed, there was this peace that came over me as the chaplain prayed over me because
Mm.
I knew that I didn't understand how, but I knew we were going to be okay, even though our situation was not okay. And that
Wow.
thread of this is not okay, what we're going through is not okay, but God is good was
Mm.
what we were able to weave through the rest of this journey. But it started
Wow.
not in March of 2020. It started with a very direct question that I felt God was just like, look at me,
Mm.
look at me.
Wow.
And would I still be good? Can you say, like the psalmist, like, it is well with my soul? Would we truly be able to say that? I, and so when people say, about strength and faith, I'm like, well, I don't know how strong I am if it took that 3 years to wrestle with me,
Wow.
but he got me
Wow.
there.
Is that you're describing a very unique experience that um I've found that the more I talk to people about these circumstances, especially when I talk to Jesus people, people who have a relationship with the Lord, a personal relationship with God, they describe something similar to this often. And I experience something similar to this. I experienced this like preparation in some ways for the tragedy that would ultimately befall my life. And I, there's a workshop that I do at churches, and I teach kind of I kind of reference there's stages that people say there's stages of grief, which is kind of, it's a little bit hogwash. It feels like, cause it's not linear. It doesn't, you
Not
and
at
I
all.
both know, and we'll talk
It's
more
like
about it.
scribble.
It does. It feels like this really just incoherent scribble that my 2-year-old puts on a paper,
Right.
and often feels cyclical, but there are kind of some phases that we go in and out of grief. But one of those really pivotal stages or phases is prior to that tragedy, is the preparation stage. And God has he kind of was preparing your heart for this moment. And as I explained that one time to somebody, I was actually teaching at a workshop, and somebody raised their hand and asked a question, and they said, "How do I not live in fear that, like, these maybe promptings that I get, that it's God preparing me for something really bad to happen?" Right? If you were sitting here right now and somebody were to ask you that question, well, is that, you just described to me this like really deep impression that you got, that like you needed to sort this out. And I've felt certain impressions like that too. Is that some kind of weird premonition that something bad is about to happen in my life? How do I not live anxious or in fear? What would you tell them if you're having coffee with somebody and they sat down and asked you that?
So I think for me, when that happened, at first I was uh, absolutely I was scared and I was fearful, but I think understanding that God can handle that, and
Mm,
and and allowing my very honest raw feelings of absolutely not God, not me, don't do this. Like the pounding on his chest, if you will, that idea that God can handle that allowed me to feel what I needed to feel and
mm,
then move past that. And I think a lot of times we have fear, and it's like this bad word, and
mm.
and people automatically assume that it's a lack of faith. But what do you do with that, right?
Yeah.
Let's, for argument's sake, if you're for fear, you have this fear. So there is something missing. There was something missing for me.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
absolutely was something missing. So what do you do with that?
Mm,
Do you just brush it off and say, well, I can't be fearful because God tells me not to be fearful. That is not of God. I'm going to push that aside.
mm,
Or are you going to lean into that and really seek God's face? Are you going
mm.
to lean into that and read and seek counsel and ask for prayer? Because honestly, when
Yeah.
the accident happened in 2017, Mo being the team leader at that time, we had people on the team that we were helping. And
Mm,
so I thought that was my purpose. That
yeah.
was my purpose, to help other people walk alongside them. Because even though it wasn't exactly the same, we were put in this position of leadership. I had to help my husband with the spouses, and just be
Yeah.
that hope, and pray for these women. I thought that was my purpose, not
Mm.
that. I thought it was over. I
Yep,
was like,
exactly. It's like, "Oh,
cool,
that's why God
like,
prepared my heart for that.
yeah,
Okay,
he
he wanted me
prepared
to have
it.
some
Cool, I
empathy."
got it.
Yeah.
Right. And then I got stronger with God. We fixed
Mm,
relationships. That's what it was. It was a prompting to really help grow us, not just with
yeah.
God, but with other people. But if I would have just been fearful and let myself stay fearful,
Mm,
I wouldn't have seeked out God, because I would have thought that's not from God. He's not giving it to me. I'm going to brush this away.
yeah.
But if you really seek God in that and ask God, not why me, in this idea of woe is me,
Mm,
but why me? What is it about me, God, that you want to use? What is it about me that
hmm.
that you are choosing as this vessel, and walking obedience in that?
Wow.
And I've seen that on the other side of that pivot. In once Smoke passed, like, asking people have asked me to speak or asked for my story, and I'm like, why me?
Wow.
And but it comes down to, it's not about me, it's about
Mm,
God, and it's about what he has done, and I am literally just sharing what he has done.
mm,
And and I think, just so going back to your question, I think lean into that, lean into that. And
mm.
but don't brush it off. Absolutely don't brush it off. Lean into that, and then find people who are like-minded, and who are going to pray for you, and who
Yeah.
are going to share with you like Bible verses and things that come to, and because throughout that whole year, that's all I heard was the verses on fear and anxiety and peace.
Mm,
But I needed those. And it would come from people that had no idea what I was walking through. I hadn't shared with them what it was. And they were just, this was impressed on my heart. I want to share this with you.
Wow.
And having these people in that community around you to be the feet of Jesus has was made such a difference for me in my life, because I knew that
Yeah.
it wasn't just a casual, oh hey, I thought of this verse, or hey, this was the verse of the day, I thought it was so cool. It was God speaking through these people and just reminding me,
Yeah.
like, this is a path we're walking right now, but you're not walking it alone.
Wow. That's so good. Leaning into that fear, right? Like that fear, that worry, that anxiety. When God tells us in scripture, don't fear, it's not a rebuke. He's not condemning us for fearing. I think he knows that we're going to have these natural human emotions. Of course, he knows that. He created us, right? And fear is a very common natural human emotion. Um, it actually can be a very redeeming emotion, right? It can alert us to danger. It can
Right.
protect us in the best cases. But there are often times things that we fear that don't actually transpire, will never transpire, and so we're unnecessarily being anxious or worried about something. And so when Jesus says don't worry, or God says don't fear all throughout scripture, I think he's saying exactly what you're saying. I think he's saying, hey, let's look into why you're
Hmm.
experiencing this fear. Like, what's the root behind this?
Right.
And for you, what I'm hearing is that you guys were saying, well, there was something that the bedrock of our faith was not hinged on God is good no matter what at that moment. It wasn't at that moment. It wasn't. But once we started untangling that and really piecing that together, then and sorting through that, it actually began to heal a whole lot of other aspects of your life and your
Oh yeah.
marriage.
Relationships. I mean, all those
Yeah.
things. It there was a change in our hearts,
Hmm.
and we just in our perspective, how we looked at things, how we saw things, and the way we loved other people, because we knew that we don't know that we're going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
And letting go of some of those things, like in marriages, there's these silly arguments that you go through and things like that.
Mm.
And being married for as long as we were, we had been together for 16 years. So we had a lot of the same things come up
Right.
over and over again.
Right.
And but this allowed us to kind of let go of some of those things, because we realized that they didn't really matter.
Mm.
And if Mo had passed in that 2017 accident, it definitely wouldn't matter. So having him with me for those other 2.5 years helped me to understand some of those things, that you got to let it go, or
Yeah.
and vice versa, like enjoy our kids more. I remember right before his deployment, we went on a spontaneous, I was not spontaneous, and go on a spontaneous trip just to go to Williamsburg, Virginia. And then we were there and we were literally driving back home. And Mo's like, let's go see family. Let's go. Let's go up to Maryland
Wow.
and go see family. And we did. And that was the last they saw him. So just
Wow.
moments like that, like leaning into those moments too, just saying, why not?
Yeah.
We're on
That's
winter
so
break.
good.
Why not? Let's
Yep.
go. And we did. And we would, and I promise you, we would have never done that before.
Man.
We would have been like,
Yeah.
well, we'll come back after, let's plan it, and we'll come back after this
Mm.
deployment, and we'll do, and that's not how we did it. And so it impacted so much more than we ever even thought.
Wow. Wow. Well, you get this knock on the door and you receive this news that he's been killed in combat. And and that in and of itself is this horrible thing to wrestle with. It accompanied by that are so many emotions. But to complicate that, this was right before the entire world shut down.
Yeah.
And
Oh
then
yeah.
so within a matter of what, weeks or days, or I mean, how long was it? Then all of a sudden, boom, the world shuts down from COVID, and now you're like in forced isolation, wrestling with the single most drastic thing that's ever happened to you. Um, what was that like?
Surreal. I had no idea. I so Mo passed. We had heard, Callie and I were at a soccer tournament that weekend, so we had heard kind of things happening, but we didn't take it seriously.
Yeah.
So, but it's fine. It's nothing. So we get back that Sunday night. That's when I get the knock on the door. We actually don't tell the kids till the next morning.
Mm,
So I end up having to leave for Dover right away, like
yeah.
within a day and a half. So I have to leave. Excuse me. And at that time, I remember my friend had to pack for me. I couldn't even think straight. I mean, I was still I mean, I was in a fog for way longer than that, but in that moment. And I remember went to Dover, and it was such a blur. It just felt like the whole world's just kind of like
Yeah.
passing, like
Yeah.
haze, and you're just standing here like, what am I doing? And so part of that chaos, what was going on, but I had no idea. I'm sitting here in days of what's going on, and we get back, and people had started showing up at the house, giving, I, dropping off snacks, food, drinks, meals, toilet paper, paper, like all like tissues. I mean, let me tell you, I still have tissues in my garage. That's how many tissues I got in the first.
Wow.
uh,
Wow.
but so by the end of that week, that's when the world shut down.
Yeah.
So I got back from Dover, and I remember getting a half opened like bag of toilet paper, like those 6 packs.
Yeah.
And they had left me 4. They took 2 and gave me 4. And that just
Wow.
showed you the community that I lived in. In the middle of a pandemic where we could not find toilet paper, we lived in a small town, could not
Yeah.
find toilet paper, could not find basic items. They were still choosing to give it to me and the kids.
Wow.
And I was getting these types of things dropped off. And even though the pandemic it was incredibly crazy
Yeah.
to have it just shut down, what it did do was keep people away that we didn't want around. So when we had
Yeah.
seen things before happen in our community, we would have media people come, we
Mm.
like out on the front lawns, like we had to put signs out, and like people just stopping by at the house. And so
Wow.
given what was going on, we didn't really have to deal with that because they weren't allowed to be there.
Yeah.
So in a way that helped. But I found that, this was not just in the very beginning when everything shut down. I found, well, I had the most amazing, and I still do have the most amazing community. Even though I live in Florida,
Mm.
I'm still connected to this community and my friends and everybody that we had there. Um, People say I have the best friends in the world, but I really, really do.
Mm.
These people have showed up in amazing ways. I didn't sleep by myself for 3 months. I had friends
Wow.
that literally rotated to sleep with me.
Wow.
I mean, I can just go on and on about these amazing people. To this day, I still get flowers. I still get, for our
Yeah.
anniversary, they send me like those comfort items like Coke and Goldfish.
Yep. Yep.
So just things like that. They're just amazing. But it allowed us to kind of keep that circle really small because we had
Mm.
to. Um, but something that I saw, which sure the pandemic kind of forced us to, but something that I saw the rest of my journey too was there was a lot of these huge moments through my
Mm.
journey. And even though I had the most amazing community and I had a lot of people just willing to listen and be there and sit in those gaps, the moments where I was really, really struggling was where those people weren't available and it was just me and God. And
Mm.
God would take me back to those moments of just me and you.
Yeah.
And I think that was important. And
Yeah.
I needed that both through the pandemic and then through the other parts of my journey
Yeah.
because so often something happens and we immediately go to people, which is good.
Yeah.
We need community. We need
Right.
community. We need people to pray over us. But more than that, we need to take it to God.
Right.
And it would be so funny because I would sit there just crying out to God. And then somebody would call me back or somebody would stop by the house. So it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like I just needed to do that first and
Yep.
then
Yep.
this would happen. But the cool thing about the pandemic was it gave us a little bit more privacy, which was
Mm.
helpful. But also you got to see people's incredible sacrificial love for us.
Mm.
So while it was crazy and all that, so the kids and I ended up getting sick right before. So in
Mm.
January we were really, really sick. So I'm thinking that's what it was.
Yeah.
And so even though we were around a lot of people, we didn't get sick again, thankfully. The biggest impact, I think, negative impact that if I would say had a negative impact on us is that it pushed everything to the right. So
Mm.
we weren't able to have a funeral until July.
Oh, wow.
And so because we had to wait for things to open up. And even when
Yeah.
we did, we were limited in how many people we could invite
Yeah.
and the way that we had to be separated. And so that was hard
Yeah.
because you want everybody that wants to be there to be there. And
Right.
you want to be able to open this up. And it wasn't like that. And it wasn't this immediate laying to rest. So we had this, 4 month, what we thought was grieving, but then it really wasn't, because then when we really started grieving was when we had laid into rest. So
Oh, wow.
it kind of rehashed all of that.
Right. Right.
But it almost like these 4 months helped us get through some of that haze, get through some of that. So when we did end up having the funeral, we were able to really feel those feelings.
Yeah.
And I think we needed to.
Yeah.
So even though it was excruciating to feel them the way that we did, because we had kind of gotten over a little bit of that haze,
Yeah.
we needed to. I mean, just like in anything else, like we said earlier, like you need to lean into those feelings. And when you
Right.
don't, it's like pressing pause on a movie, right? You're like, oh, this is a scary part. I don't want to see it. So I'm going to pause it. I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
But when you come back, you're coming right back to this place.
That's right.
So if you press pause, it's just pause.
Right.
You're not working through it.
Right.
So it helped us to have a little bit of preparation almost, and then have to work through those feelings,
Yeah,
and
that's
but
good.
still be able to work through those feelings with just the few people that we wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't occur to me until now that it could have, I mean, I'm assuming it could have felt like that when you had the funeral, that became the kind of finality, the concrete, the reality that this is the case, because prior to that, it almost just feels like, even though cognitively he was killed in combat, it almost feels like he's just still deployed until you have
Oh,
that moment
100%.
where it's like, no, this is real. This is
Mhm.
real. Hmm.
And it's funny you say that, because the deployment was supposed to be over in July. So
Mm. Wow.
100%, that's exactly how, even to the kids. I remember talking to my daughter and her saying, I don't believe it. It's daddy's still just deployed. And that's how we kind
Wow.
of dealt with that. Cause like we were used to him being gone.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
this was at the beginning of the deployment. So in our minds, even though we knew, there was a little bit of that protection in that, well, he would have still been gone anyway.
Mm.
Um, and so us being able to do the funeral in July, it was the time was just right, because that's when he would have come back from
Wow.
deployment. And then even though he was at Dover, he ended up coming home from Dover on my birthday.
Oh
And
man.
so that was something that it was that God has taken so many dates and redeemed them.
Mm.
And it sounds silly that there would be redemption in Mo coming home, because
Mm.
he had passed, because 3 years prior we had lost those guys on my birthday.
Mm.
But it was a gift. It was a gift to get him back and
Mm.
be able to have the funeral and have the services that we so needed.
Yeah.
And for him too, just to be able to not be in Dover, and just be able to go through the process that we needed to go through.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember the first time we went to go back to Arlington, because he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. We went back with the kids that December, and this was the first time we had been back since July, and I was a mess.
Mm.
And to sit there and watch your four kids stand over their dad's headstone, I mean, that you would, I don't wish that on anybody.
Mm.
And I'm standing there and I'm just sobbing,
Yeah.
and my kids are, all four of them, standing over the gravestone, and they're not crying.
Mm.
And so I'm like wiping my tears, and I'm like, hold it together.
Yeah.
And I go up to them and I was like, are you guys okay? Like, this is Daddy's headstone. And I kept saying, like, are you okay? Are you okay? And I remember my daughter saying, Mommy, that's not Daddy. Daddy's, and the kids and the boys are like, yeah, Mommy, like, that's not Daddy. He's in heaven. So,
Mm.
and it was such a I can't even explain it. I just sat there, jaw on the ground, and
Mm.
I said, "You're right.
Wow.
You're 100% right. That's not daddy."
Wow.
And then they were asking us where like our other friends were buried, so we walked and
Mm.
went to go visit their heads, and it was just this unbelievable moment that I'll never forget. And while we've been back to Arlington, the kids, they go there as a memorial and in honor of not just their dad, but the others that we've lost there
Yeah.
too. And living in Tampa, we're near the SoCon Memorial, so they have Mo's name is on it, so we're able to go there. And we actually go there more
Mm.
often because it's here versus
Yeah.
Arlington. But um, whenever we go, it's really interesting to see the kids because they'll look at the names and they'll remember and they'll share stories and they're like, oh, I wonder how this person's doing, or the parents or the wife, and we talk about them, which is what ultimately you want. That's just what
Right.
you want. You want to never forget them. And
Right.
so it was just incredible to do that. But the pandemic is what kind of kept pushing our timelines.
Yeah.
So even that, where it was July and then we couldn't get back till December, again, there was almost this like preparation that we were able to go through, kids included. So when we did have that moment, they had already understood where their dad was and knew it was
Wow.
certainty. So much so that getting there, they were like, this is really pretty. And they cleaned it off, but
Wow.
that's not.
Wow. It's interesting. I was just listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about unless we approach the kingdom of God like a child. And there's just so much simplicity and innocence with what you're explaining right there, you know, of just,
Mhm.
this isn't dad. He's not here. He's in heaven. He's with Jesus. We'll see him
Yeah.
again one day. And of course that doesn't dismiss all of just the grief and the turmoil that we wrestle with, on this side of eternity. Of course it doesn't. We're going to wrestle with that. But there's something so refreshing about that perspective. I think that's why scripture tells us we don't grieve as those who have no hope. We grieve
Mhm.
differently. We still grieve. We just grieve differently.
Right.
Hmm. Lisette, I wonder if you can remember some of the wrestlings that you had in this grief journey and you're continuing to have. I mean, again, this is only 2 years. You're only 2 years removed from
Yeah.
this, and so over the past 2 years, what are some of the major things that you've wrestled with God with? You obviously wrestled some things to the ground years leading up to this, but I'm sure there's some other things that you've had to wrestle with. Can you
Oh,
talk about that? Maybe talk about how God's shown up in that wrestling.
oh man. I think the biggest thing that I mean, I still remind myself of stuff because like we said, like one of the biggest things that I struggled with was, you hear that expression, gone too soon. He was so
Mm,
young. Um, and I really struggled with that because that takes God out of the equation.
mm,
And it takes the days that we have numbered on this earth out.
yeah.
And we can't do that. So
Wow.
I, through the process, there was so much that I didn't know about what kind of led up to his death.
Mm,
And I would find things out
yeah.
and it would make me angry and it would make me just have these feelings all over again. And I
Right.
had to keep reminding myself that it's not the how Mo died,
Mm,
but the why. And the why is simply that those were the days that God already had for him on this earth.
yeah.
So it didn't matter if it was killed in combat or in a car accident or the cancer.
Mm,
And it was this harsh reality of, and none of us know, right? And we
right.
had this 5-year plan. We were going to move to Florida as a family. So
Wow.
just reminding ourselves that we we think that we have the luxury of time,
Mm,
but we don't. And so going back to the details of how he passed made me angry because I was like, well, what if he wouldn't have done this? Or what if this would have been different? Or what?
yeah.
It, it, that doesn't matter. And not that how he passed doesn't matter,
Mm.
but I don't need to reconcile that.
Right. Right.
I don't. What I need to understand is God's hand in this.
Yeah.
But that has been such, I would say, my hardest struggle is just slapping myself back to that, and
Mm.
that moment of stop, because you're winding yourself up over the how, and it's not how, it's why.
Mm.
And then
Wow.
just working through that, because you hear that so much, and it stings,
Yeah.
when you hear, but he was so young, and I gone too soon. And
Mm.
while I would agree,
Mm.
we're not exempt from that.
That's right. Yeah.
I had a friend lose her son at 6 years old. I
Wow.
mean, that's, you don't expect that. You don't
Right.
anticipate that. So we need to stop living like we have the luxury of time,
Wow.
and really think about, if today was really my last day, what am I doing with that? And what
Yeah.
am I doing to create this urgency in others to seek God and to
Yeah.
understand that, because I heard it growing up all the time. Like, I did evangelism and stuff, and people would always say, I'll accept Jesus when I'm old. It doesn't
Mm.
matter. And my relationship will get there. But what if it doesn't?
Wow.
What if on the way home today, something happens? And so I think for sure, my biggest wrestling with God has been that, is
Yeah.
really believing that, and understanding and letting go of that need to know, of the need to understand,
Mhm.
this and this and this and this happened. This is like almost justify, right?
Yeah.
Why he passed. And I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to be able to justify this is why he died.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember, um, at his celebration of life, we had people accept Jesus
Yeah.
at that.
Mm.
And we sound crazy, but I know that that's what Mo would have wanted.
That's right.
And 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 so when we say, like, if only for just one,
Mm.
then God served his purpose. And it sounds ridiculous to say, take my husband because for the glory of God. But we knew, especially with the preparation leading up to that 100% it was for the glory of God. And
Yeah.
we've seen people develop, both accept Jesus and grow in their relationship because of it.
Wow.
It stemmed from what happened. And I
Yeah.
remember hearing stories after Mo passed about how Mo would share his faith with people, and or seeing us walk through this has changed their faith and things like that. And
Wow.
again, that is not us, because I
Yeah.
can tell you, Mo and I were not these like stellar Christians that, like, we're like, do not put me on a poster for Christianity. Like, I but it was God, just in spite of me, in spite of me,
Mm.
God still shining,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they didn't see everything else that we had to wrestle with before. So that was a huge wrestling with God. And then now moving forward, I think another wrestle that I take constantly is my kids.
Mm.
Just, I it hurts me so much, to
Yeah.
hear my daughter say, I lost my dad at 10.
Mm.
I like that. So, and she was the oldest one. My youngest was 5. And and there's again that, like, pounding on his chest of, like, this is not fair. It's not fair. My child was 5, and he was born through Mo's Marsoc journey. So he wasn't around.
Yeah.
So he has very, very little memories of Mo. And it
Mm.
just seems so unfair. But it's that back and forth, right? Because it's that wrestling of these really negative feelings of
Yeah.
fear and anger and wanting to understand, and going back to, but God.
Yeah.
I don't understand, but God does.
Mm.
I am angry, but God can take it. And it's not fair, but God is still good.
Yeah. Yep.
It's that
Yep.
but God. But that's been my wrestling, is to bring me back to those but God moments.
Mm, man.
And
Wow.
it's not easy. I mean, we still struggle, like there's still the ebbs and flows,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's not linear. And like some days I feel like I got it, we're good, we hit a stride, and then we
Yep.
fall apart.
Then all of a sudden the
Um,
next day, boom. You're like, whoa,
yeah,
what happened?
yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I was like, but we were fine, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just, but leaning into that. So when we have those days where we're like, my kids will be like, I miss daddy, and I do too.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yep.
And I'll ask them, do you want to go to the memorial? Or they'll like, Mo loved sushi, chocolate chip cookies, and Coke. And so we'll have a day that we're really missing Mo. And I buy some chocolate chip cookie dough, we order some sushi, and I let the kids have some Coke. And, and it sounds
That sounds
like
amazing.
silly and all of that, but it makes us feel
That's
better,
great. Yeah.
and it's one of those like unspoken things that we're having a hard day. Well, we're going to order sushi and make some chocolate chip cookies and
Yeah.
call it a day,
Yeah.
and,
Yep.
but allow ourselves to say, like, I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm confused, all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so important to remember those days are still, and sometimes weeks are still going to come.
Oh, yeah.
As you
Hmm.
move through the grief journey, they come fewer and farther between, but they're still there. They still come. And it's helpful to not be caught off guard by those, to know, oh, this is normal, this is common, this is not indicative of the fact that, like, oh, my faith must not be strong enough, or I must not be healing, or I must be, not far enough down the track like I'm supposed to. No, no, they're still going to come. I'm 6 years plus removed. I still have those days
Yeah.
where I'm like, oh, I just really miss her.
Hmm.
I just miss her. And but to encourage everybody that's listening to this, they're fewer and farther between. I miss her every day, right? I know you're going to miss Mo
Right.
every day,
Right.
but the gut wrenching, knock you out, make you not want to get out of bed in the morning, that becomes fewer and farther between, especially as you begin to see what God does coming through it. And I just love the fact that you have highlighted that too, Lisette. That, man, even from the moment of his funeral, the moment of his death, even, that people were being drawn to the Lord because of him. And I know you've said a couple times, I know this sounds silly, I know this sounds crazy. Yeah, maybe to some people who aren't seeing through this kingdom lens that we see through, it
Right.
sounds silly, but isn't that, if we think about it, isn't that what we all want with our life? I mean, whether we live to be 28 or 88, we want our
Right.
life to matter.
Yeah.
We want it to have impact. We want to make a difference in at least one other person. And when it all boils down to it, if we can say that about our life, again, whether it was 28 or 88, this life ends, that's that's what we want. And that's so cool to hear you with that perspective, to say this is what Mo would have wanted. This is what we want, and this is the legacy we're going to continue to carry out.
Yeah.
I have a question, especially about, you guys are and have been a military family, and this
Yeah.
is, it can be, that is a very unique uh, situation to be in as a military family. Oftentimes, that gets misunderstood, or that people just, they don't know how to understand, because they're not in that situation. But especially with Mo, he was in Marsoc. You mentioned that. That's, I mean, some of the best trained um,
Mhm.
uh, military in our armed forces is Marsoc. And so you've got these folks who are going into these special ops missions, and that community kind of sits, I'm sure, on edge a lot of times, especially when military wives hearing their husbands are being deployed. You know
Right.
what um, what is that like? Can you give us a little bit of a window into that, as you, not only as you have experienced those emotions yourself, this, like, news that your husband's going to be deployed, but also as you've observed it in other people, as you've ministered to other wives, um, other folks in the community who their spouse is going to be, deployed, and they're wrestling with, man, the glaring reality of this could be the last time I see him. This could be the last time I see her. That's a ever present reality. What's that like?
I think understanding that, I think that we hide from that feeling of this could be the last because we don't want to think about it.
Mm,
But again, to the point of like leaning into it, I think it's where you want to let go of some of those arguments, take a
mm,
couple extra minutes with your family. Um, I think as military spouses, especially leading up to a deployment, there's this period where you almost push him away because it's easier to be mad at him or it's easier
mm.
to be detached. So when he leaves, it doesn't feel as ugly.
Yeah. Wow.
But I remember before this deployment, it didn't feel that way. And it scared me because I said, oh no, why am I not pulling away from him? Why am I
Yeah.
drawing closer to him? Does this mean this is it type of thing? But I'm so glad that I did because I think we fear creates this in
Yeah.
us where we want to push all that away. And being in that community, we see it all the time, and it's so hard because we see our best friends go through it.
Mm,
We see our like the people that we're used to sitting next to, that we do life with, lose their spouse.
yeah.
And um, I think understanding that yes, it could be a reality. But
Yeah.
again, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with those days?
Mm,
Are you going to waste them away, pushing each other away because you're saying you're fearful of him not coming back, but what you're really doing is banking on he is coming back. And so I'll deal
mhm,
with this when he comes back. And no, don't
mm.
do that because hopefully he does come back and
Yeah.
you can plan that post deployment trip and you can go away on vacation as a family and you can talk to him every other day. But if you can't, then what are you going to do with the days that you know that you have,
Mm,
which is today? Because it's not even tomorrow, it's today. So what are you
yeah.
going to do with today? And I think as military spouses, we get so used to unplugging
Mm,
and our husbands leave and we're like, we got it. We kind of get into this like mode of we
yeah.
got the house, we got the kids, we got school, we got, and so we create this distance, but then we regret it
Mm,
because those were days that we knowingly didn't do anything with
mm,
because it was easier to not get close. I remember before I lost my grandfather, he was sick. He was given like 4 months. He ended up living for 4 years.
hmm.
But I remember sitting by his bedside every single day, and it was excruciating
Yeah.
because every day that I left, I thought, this is it. I'm
Mm,
never going to see him again. But I'm so grateful because I didn't get 4 months. I got 4 years. And it was painful that I got 4 years. And I think
yeah.
back to those conversations and those things that were said. And the same thing goes for military spouses. We almost have this, excuse me, this mode that we get in
Yeah.
of let's do this. And we got it. And we do. We have it. Like
Yeah.
the guys leave but
Yeah.
when the guys leave, we got it. Right. And I think
Mm,
um it's hard because I feel like when Mo passed, I was like a walking example of what your worst nightmare was.
mm,
But and I felt that. I felt like this awkward, like, okay, I'm proof that your worst nightmare could come true.
right.
But all I wanted to do was just like scream from the mountains, make it count.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to hear it could happen.
Yeah.
But if we don't tell people it could happen, that ignorance is not bliss.
Right.
So when we tell people it's fine, it's not going to happen, then we rob them of the ability of making it count today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's hard. I mean, but what are we really doing
Right.
when we're telling people to push that back, right?
Right.
Because it goes back to that question back in 2017. If the worst scenario happens, am I still good? Is God still good? Because a
Mhm.
lot of people, God's good because it hasn't hit me. or it hit close to home and that really sucks, but it's not me.
Yeah.
So instead of pushing these feelings away and the reality, because it's not just deployment. Like the guys come back from deployment and we lose guys to suicide, we lose guys to car
Yeah.
accidents, we lose guys to cancer, we lose guys. So it's not just deployment. Like we have to take that idea out that it's only on deployment that this can happen.
Yeah.
Because again, that's not that it's not the why. It's the why that we have to focus on. It's not the how. So I don't care if it's a deployment. I don't care if it's a car accident. I don't care if it's in his sleep. We have to stop pretending that we have all these days. And that may not be like the popular answer of or what makes us feel good and gives us those warm and fuzzies, but the reality is we may not be rocking on that porch with our spouse until we're 90 years old.
Mm.
And that sucks and it's unfair and it's not what we want to hear.
Yeah.
But what are we going to do in the meantime to make those days count? So that if we do get to 90, man, we live this amazing fulfilled life where we have loved so hard because we have loved like we don't have tomorrow.
Yeah, it's great. Wow.
I even like my kids, I remember my daughter, she's taken that on too. The loving, she's like, Mom, she goes, Mom, I've become so soft. Because like Mo would say, like, don't be soft, you know. And she says, Mom, I've become so soft. Because we have, because we want to love you and we want to love because, and we want you to know, and like make it weird. Tell your friends you love them and like tell the people you love around you that you love them. And then also that as believers, like lean into that part of with God though. Lean into like not taking for granted that, well, we're Christians, we have faith. That's not enough. To just say that you believe in God and read your Bible when you get around to it, it's not enough because it's not if the problems come, it's when. And maybe it's not the loss of your spouse. And maybe it's not the loss of your child, but maybe it's an illness. Maybe it's a bankruptcy. Maybe it's losing your house. There's so many things that could happen in your life. So it's not if the storms are coming, it's when.
That's right. Yep.
So prepare for those, right? So as military spouses, we're not immune to issues. We have this amazing community and like the military community is almost like its own little world. Like we understand things that other people don't. Our lives are crazy compared to civilian life. Like you know, like our husbands being gone all the time and the way that we live is not normal.
Yeah.
But it is to us. It's so normal. Like, you know, it's like, oh, your husband went on a business trip for a week. We're like, that's it. You can't even miss them in a week. You know, like it's just we have this thinking, you know, and it's just kind of ingrained in you, you know, and through the years and everything. But the biggest thing, like being in the military community, is leaning into that community, but not shying away from the hard answer and the hard responses of, you know, like it's fine, and maybe it very well will be fine. But ask yourself, what if it's not?
Yeah.
Are you going to take that extra trip before the deployment? Are you going to let the kids stay up a little longer to watch the movie with dad?
Wow.
Instead of pushing away, maybe we lean in.
Wow. Man. Lisette, you've given all of us just such a good perspective on life. I mean, I think whether you're in a military family or not, whether you're part of the military community or not, we need to be living with this kind of perspective. You know, it's obviously a lot more of an ever-present reality in the case of military families. It's something that they wrestle with and grapple with regularly, but it's something we should all be wrestling with and grappling with. Because to your point, you have no idea. We have no idea when will be the last time that we will, you know, greet our family members or say goodbye to them, you know, as we leave the house for work, or we have no idea. And I think to live in that kind of, in some ways, suspended, soaking up every ounce of time that we have with each other, and the reality of the kingdom of God being so near, heaven being so near, it brings into perspective the things that are important, the things that are not,
Right.
the
Because I think,
priorities of life.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think, we going back to the fear aspect, like we don't want to have fear. So
Mhm.
when we are told like our husbands could pass in deployment, it brings up fear. So we say our natural instinct is to say, but it's fine. It's going to be fine. That's
Mm,
not going to happen. Well, we don't know that that's not going to happen. So I feel like when we're doing a disservice to people
mm,
by giving these statements that we think are going to make them feel better. And while they do, it's a temporary fix.
yeah,
It's a temporary, they're going to feel better for this short period of time.
yeah,
And then bank on that, nothing's going to happen. And again, I'm not just talking about the passing of a spouse, I'm talking about life
yeah,
and
right,
storms,
right,
And so if we can't, it's not something that we should get in the habit of doing. We can make people feel better by sharing with them the promises of God, giving
mm,
them the tools to work through those storms,
yep, yep,
to to know where to turn.
yeah,
And it's not drugs and alcohol, and it's God.
yep,
It's godly people that are going to pray for you, that are going to sit in that gap. It's
yeah,
opening the Word of God. It's going to church and finding a community. And if we don't give them the tools, and we know the tools and we're not giving it to them,
mhm,
then what are we doing?
right, right,
We're not just motivational speakers trying to make everybody feel good.
that's right,
That's not our job.
yeah, mm. Phew. Yeah, that's the thing. What did Jesus say? I think it's John 16. He said, "I've told you these things so that you'll have peace."
No.
Well, what are the things he told us? Well, what's going to bring us peace? Immediately following that, he said, "In this world, you will have trouble." He didn't tell us, "Hey, I've told you these things so that you'll have peace. Everything's going to be okay." It's not
Right.
going to happen. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about it, right? That's not what he said. He said, "I've told you these things so that you'll have peace. In this world, you'll have trouble." And it makes us go, "Wait, hold on. I thought you wanted me to have peace, Jesus. Now I'm feeling anxious
Right.
about this." And he goes, "But take heart. I have overcome the world." And
Mhm.
we know that if he has overcome the world, if he is in us, we are in him, then we too overcome the world, no matter what trouble or sorrow comes our way. And so, Lizette, you've reminded us of that today. That I'm deeply, deeply, deeply sorry for the loss that you guys have endured. I'm so grateful, and I can speak on behalf of our entire community. We're so grateful to you and to Mo, the sacrifice that you guys have made for our country. Nobody is going to be able to understand the extent of the sacrifice that you guys have made for our country. Thank you for that. Um, and we're deeply heartbroken for you guys. And yet I'm sitting here and I'm watching you and listening to you, and you are a true testament of Jesus saying, "Take heart, I've overcome the world." Jesus' spirit is all over you, is all in you. And it's just so
Mhm.
cool to see what he is doing right now and what he's going to continue to do both in and through you. And so I'm thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing deeply from your experience, deeply from your story, but also challenging us. I mean, gosh, like you've challenged us, Lizette, for us to go, "Hey, I need to consider like what's today? I need to consider today." you know, and I need
Yeah.
to wrestle these things down. Um,
Yeah.
so good. Lizette, is there any way that any place that we can, just kind of tune more into what to you and your family and follow you guys and you guys on social media? I mean, how can folks hear more from you?
Oh man. My response always is, "What? What do you want to hear from me?" Um, I am on social media, so I am no longer the director of a ministry anymore. Since I've moved, I had to get plugged in here.
Yeah.
Um, so I have spoken before at different things. I mostly military and a women's conference also. Just talking about just God
Mm.
and who He is and what He's doing I've said it so many times that it's in spite of me. It has nothing to do with me.
Mm.
Um, it's God has. I I would think of like the strength like manna, where it
Yeah.
was just every day, just enough for what I needed. And I remember when I would stress about, but God, what about in a week or in a year or
Mm.
Callie's like wedding and I would try to gain strength for the future, it would
Right.
spoil and my day would not be okay.
Wow.
And so if I just focus on the strength that God would give me that day for
Mm.
what He was calling me that day, it was good.
That's great.
And it just that reminder of relying on God daily.
Yeah.
I remember I went to a widow's retreat and they called widowhood. They said it was a calling, and I was
Mm.
like, what?
Yep.
Not a calling that I ever thought I'd have.
Yeah.
So while I am on social media, I've, it's pretty day to day stuff.
Yeah.
I'm nothing special. I'm really not. But if anybody is ever in a situation, please reach out. I would
Yeah.
love to speak to you and pray for you. Um, really just pray for you. I love to pray over people.
Yeah.
And, um, I remember my youth leader many, many, many years ago told me that if you have an opportunity to pray for somebody, when somebody says, will you pray for me? And you
Mm.
have the opportunity to do it in that moment, do it in that moment.
Wow.
And sometimes it's not a phone call. So somebody will message me and say, can you pray for me? And I'll just text them the
Yeah.
prayer and I start Heavenly Father and I just start praying. And that just, it truly is an honor to be able to pray for people.
Mm.
So I would love to be able to pray for you if I could. And not because I'm anything special, but because God says if two or more are there, I am present, and I want that for you.
Wow.
But really, I'm not doing a whole lot right now.
You're being a mom
Just
and you're
being a
walking
mom
this
and
road out.
that total soccer mom. My daughter started playing flag football, and that's a whole other beast for me.
Nice.
So I'm just enjoying being a mom right now and plugging into my church. So I don't have a ministry per se that I'm doing day to day, but I'm really grateful for opportunities like these
Yeah.
where I get to share my story
Yeah.
because it's just not about me. God has shown up
That's
in the
great.
most incredible ways in our lives through this, like not just for me, but for my kids. Like I've seen it in them. And I'm just so grateful. And
Yeah.
how could you not share what,
Yeah.
you know?
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Thank you for sharing your story and encouraging us and challenging us. It's just been such a great, great honor to be able to speak with you.
Thank you. The honor was mine, truly. Thank you for thinking of me.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.